Hey everybody, welcome back. I've decided to split this up into two presentations so I don't get long and boring like most psychology instructors are. And the second half is going to talk about a little bit more progress into the kind of the introduction of modern psychology. And I wanted to mention two individuals in particular. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about this little mask up here I have on the wall. One of my viewers said, "Hey, Mr. LeDuc, what's up with the devil in your office?" And I want you to know that I'm not a devil worshiper. That is actually, I bought that in Japan, and I was kind of mesmerized by that, which is a psychological term, by the way. Franz Mesmer was the guy's name that introduced it. But anyway, this mask kind of embodies or represents the image of a scorned woman. So there you have it. No wonder it's a little scary. Okay, so let's get into this and talk about a couple of personalities that are important. They brought to light psychology out of the darkness and ignorance of the mysterious, the mystical, and brought it into the rational. They knew that it was more than just a demonic possession. Okay, so in the 1700s, there was a man by the name of Philippe Pinel in France, centuries before modern psychology, and he was instrumental in the development of a more humane psychological approach to the custody and care of psychiatric patients, referred to today as moral therapy, which at the time was a revolutionary approach in a time when straitjackets and periods of seclusion and isolation were the only sanctioned treatments, or should we say punishments. He worked on the abolition of shackling mental patients in chains and brought humanization into play. Now, he was known as some as the father of modern psychiatry. That's Philippe Pinel. And one of his more controversial yet in-your-face theories of society was his practice of holding lunatic balls, where he would provide a formal dance for his patients and let them get dressed up and express their liberation of their mental disorders. Here's how he sums up his work. "I cannot here avoid giving my most decided suffrage in favor of the moral qualities of maniacs. I have nowhere met, excepting in romances, with fonder husbands, more affectionate parents, more impassioned than in the lunatic asylum during their intervals of calmness and reason." The second pioneer of humane treatment of the mentally ill was a woman by the name of Dorothea Dix, a follower of Pinel, but in the 1800s, she played an instrumental role in the founding or expansion of more than 30 hospitals for the treatment of the mentally ill. She was born in the United States, in the state of Maine, and in the United States, she was a leading international figure in the movement that challenged the idea that people with mental disturbances could not be cured or helped. She also was a staunch critic of cruel and unusual and neglectful practices toward the mentally ill, such as caging and incarceration and painful physical restraint. She also helped recruit nurses for the Union Army during the Civil War. As a result, she transformed the field of nursing. I think that's important to mention some of the female contributors to early psychology because it was sort of an old boys network. And these women, which I will discuss throughout the series, were iconic historical contributors in the field of psychology who inspired women worldwide to make their mark in medicine and break down the barriers of sexism. So we'll talk about the major females. Now, before we close our little meeting of the minds, I'd like to share with you a little history lesson of a true madman, the Roman emperor known as Caligula. And I want to share with you 10 facts that show why he was Rome's craziest emperor, as described by an author named Mark Oliver. Every Roman emperor has a few crazy stories under his belt, but none of them compare to the tales of Caligula. He's the one Roman emperor, historians are confident that he was certifiably insane. 6 ancient Romans wrote about Caligula's life, and every one of them agreed that he was completely off his rocker. They left stories about him that are so ridiculous that some people now insist that these events could not have possibly happened. But that's not because we have any evidence against them. Caligula's life was just too crazy to be believed. Here are the 10 facts listed in order from 10 to 1 And so, without further ado, here are the facts that show why Caligula was Rome's craziest emperor. Um, now, let's talk about the first one. Give me just a second. All right, here we go. I wish I had all these memorized, but I don't quite have them all memorized. So just bear with me as I share by reading and remembering using a script to make sure that I get the facts accurate. Okay. All right, here we go. Number 10. He invited his horse to drink wine at his dinner table. Caligula probably never made his horse a consul, but that doesn't mean he didn't treat the animal like a human being. According to multiple Roman sources, Caligula treated his favorite horse, Incitatus, better than most people. This horse had his own home. It wasn't just an upgraded stable either. Caligula gave his horse his own multiple room house, complete with furniture and a crew of slaves who were ordered to follow the horse's every command. At dinner time, Caligula would invite his horse to dine with him. The horse would be brought to the dinner table, where the emperor and his horse would be served wine in golden goblets and would share a toast to the horse's good health. He even sent his soldiers out to make sure that the animal got some peace and quiet. Reportedly, after Caligula noticed that the crowds cheering at the games were bothering his horse, he sent his soldiers to force everyone in attendance to stay quiet on pain of death until the horse got some rest. Number 9. Caligula tried to replace the head on the statue of Zeus with his own. Was he a god? No, just crazy. Caligula wasn't satisfied to just be an emperor. He wanted to be a god, and he set up his own cult to make sure it happened. The emperor of Rome had temples constructed where people could worship him. God complex, anyone? Inside, there were life-size gold statues made of him that the people of Rome were encouraged to bow before and worship. Made of pure gold, by the way, not just gold-plated. He didn't stop there. He had plans to chop off the head of the statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and replace it with the likeness of his own head. He even hired his own team of priests with their own extravagant rituals. To show devotion to Caligula, a sacrifice bull wouldn't be enough. His worshippers were expected to sacrifice flamingos and peacocks in his honor. His obsession with declaring himself to be a god nearly caused a revolt. At one point, frustrated that the Jews weren't worshiping him enough, Caligula ordered Petronius, the governor of Syria, to build a massive statue of him inside the temple in Jerusalem. That's kind of defilement, isn't it? The Jews were ready to riot at this point and probably would have if Petronius hadn't talked Caligula out of it. In the end, though, Caligula had Petronius's head chopped off as punishment for making Caligula change his mind. Yikes. Number 8, he ordered his army to attack the English Channel. Legend has it that Caligula once declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea, and ordered his men to stab the English Channel. No joke, stab the English Channel. There's some reason to think that the story's a little exaggerated, but there's no question that Caligula sent an army to the English Channel, and even the soberest versions of the tale don't paint Caligula in the best light. He still sent his army into the ocean. The version accepted by most historians is that Caligula was leading a failing campaign against the Britons, and his men were on the verge of revolt because he'd cut their pay. So, to make it up to them, he led his entire army, including the artillery, to the English Channel and told them that they could fill their helmets with as many seashells as they wanted. In lieu of pay, his men were to take spoils from the ocean as their reward for their hard work. Anything they could fit in a hat was theirs for the taking, he promised them. Go your way happy, Caligula told his men as they scooped shells and rocks out of the ocean. Go your way rich. Number 7, he ordered a mass execution because he thought people were praying against him. When Caligula took the throne, he invited some of the political enemies of Tiberius, the last emperor, to come back to Rome. Caligula even invited one to sit down with him personally and then asked how the man had spent his time in exile. Here's what the man said. I constantly prayed to the gods for what has come to pass, the man told him, that Tiberius might die and you become emperor. Pretty good, huh? He was trying to flatter Caligula, but it didn't work out that way. Instead, the man accidentally got a few thousand people killed. What Caligula got from the conversation was that this man had prayed to the gods for Tiberius's death, and apparently his prayers had been answered. And that meant there was a pretty good chance that the people exiled by Caligula were praying against him too. So after talking to the man, Caligula released an order to kill every person he'd ever exiled for trying to turn the gods against him. And he made it a long-term policy. From then on, when Caligula made an enemy, he had the person's dead body paraded in front of him before he slept easy. Number 6. Caligula built massive floating orgy palaces. I know that got your attention. It did mine. Caligula may have been crazy, but he definitely knew how to party. After he came to power, Caligula blew every penny he had on building 2 massive floating pleasure palaces so that he could throw orgies inside. I'm not making this up. Placed on Lake Nemi, these gigantic barges had prows covered in jewels and floors paved with glass mosaics. The vessels were filled with massive statues and golden cups. Even the sails were made of purple silk, a material so rare at the time that it was exclusively used to make the emperor's clothes. Caligula hosted crazy orgies on the Lake Nemi ships, and his favorite guests were his own sisters. Oh boy, but he didn't stop at incest. Caligula ordered his noblemen to bring their wives when they visited. He made them line up in front of him, inspected their bodies, and picked his favorite to bring into his chamber. Then he came back out, sat down with her husband, and made the man sit through a detailed review of how his wife was in bed. Whoa. Crazy? Perverted? Sure. Number 5. He rode a horse across the Gulf just to prove a fortune teller wrong. Caligula's greatest achievement was building a 5-kilometer-long, 3-mile floating bridge across the Gulf of Bay. At the time, a bridge like that was completely unheard of, and he did it entirely out of spite. Before he'd become emperor, an astrologer named Thrasyllus had predicted that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Gulf of Bay. Caligula built the bridge just to rub it in that the astrologer had been wrong. Caligula got every ship he could, and he lined them up across the Gulf. Then he had slaves lay earth on top of the ships to make a huge bridge. Then he hopped on his horse and rode back and forth across the bridge for 2 days straight, so that everyone knew the fortune teller had been wrong. Pride? Jeez. He had an audience devoured alive because he was bored. That's number 4. During intermission at the games of ancient Rome, criminals would be executed for the amusement of the crowd. You know this. After they had been lined up, their throats were slit while their audience either rewarded their deaths with light applause or shuffled out to get refreshments. 7th inning stretch? That wasn't Caligula's idea, but he was a big fan. Caligula liked the game so much that he made it illegal to schedule a court case or a funeral while the games were in session, just to make sure nobody missed them. Once, when there were no criminals to be executed during intermission, he took matters into his own hands, of course. He ordered his guards to throw a random section of the audience into the ring. Then he unleashed the animals so that he could watch these people get devoured alive. Wow, I'd love to go to one of those, wouldn't you? Next one, he wouldn't let anyone mention goats around him at all. Goats. As a young man, Caligula had an issue with body hair, and he was very sensitive about it. Hair grew everywhere on his body except for the top of his head, where he had a bald spot. He made sure, though, that no one got away with making fun of him. It's likely that he stopped artists from drawing his bald spot as it shows up in written descriptions of him, but rarely in ancient art. To deal with the hairiness, he made it a crime for anyone to say the word goat in his presence. As emperor, he had the power to do pretty well anything he wanted, as he frequently reminded everyone around him. He didn't stop at banning people from talking about goats. In fact, he used his powers in ways only dreamed of in socially anxious internet memes. When he got fed up with having to talk to people all the time, Caligula made it illegal to greet him twice. Anyone who wanted to shake his hand could do it one time, but that was all you got. After that, you had to leave him alone or else. Number 2, he forced a man to drink with him after murdering the man's son. That's just plain sick. Caligula once executed a man for being handsome. He spotted a good-looking man with a nice haircut and a snappy sense of fashion, and he got so jealous that he had the man executed for it. The man's father did everything he could to save his son's life. He begged Caligula to spare his son, but it had the opposite effect. In response, Caligula sped up the son's execution. But in return, Caligula invited the father to dine and drink with the emperor himself immediately following the son's death. The man was forced to drink a toast to the emperor's health, eat food at his table, and accept every gift Caligula gave him, all while staring at the person who just killed his son. According to the senator Seneca, the father had to sit there and smile throughout, knowing that his other sons would die if he showed the slightest hint of grief. And finally, number 1, he threatened to beat up a god. It's easy to think that Caligula might just have had a wicked sense of humor, or that he might have been putting on a show. But there's a lot of reason to think that the emperor was truly mentally ill, crazy, loony. Okay? There are reports that Caligula had major delusions throughout his life. Reportedly, he rarely slept for more than 3 hours at a time because his hallucinations were at their worst at night. Oh, I get it, hallucinations. For example, he once stayed up all night complaining that the ocean had been talking to him. There are also reports that he would openly talk to the god Jupiter, but not in a devout religious way. He'd argue with an imaginary god, carrying on a heated conversation with the being that no one else could see. The philosopher Seneca claimed that he once saw Caligula threaten Jupiter. They'd been watching a ballet when thunder started to crash across the horizon. Furious at the gods for interrupting his show, Caligula stormed outside, started yelling at Jupiter, and threatened to beat the god to death, which just might be the sobering reality behind the madness of Caligula. Some Roman emperors were made to seem mad by their detractors, and some went mad with power. But Caligula may just have been mad inside and out. And maybe he had access to mushrooms and cactus. That's all for the lesson for today, guys. So I appreciate you listening to part 2. Next time, we'll be discussing the structures and functions of the brain. Until then, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube podcast series, Psycho-Ology. And don't forget to keep it cool. We'll see you next time. You take care. And stay away from those mushrooms and peyote and magic cactus, all you slackers in high school. I mean it.